Imagine standing on a lonely ridge in West Texas. The sun is sinking low, throwing long shadows over the brittle grass. You see dust on the horizon, not cattle, but riders. Dozens of them, moving fast, silent as ghosts. Their horses bred for speed and war. Their faces painted with ochre and charcoal, symbols of thunder, snakes, and war spirits. Their bows strung tight, lances ready, shields decorated with visions seen in dreams. And you realize, this isn't a raid on settlers. This is Comanche fury turned against an ancient enemy, the Apache. This is the untold story of a bloody campaign that reshaped the Southwest before white men ever built forts or drew borders. A story most Americans never hear, but one worth remembering. Long before wagon trains and cattle drives, the plains were a world unto themselves. The Apache had arrived centuries earlier, carving out a life across what we now call New Mexico, Arizona, and West Texas. They hunted deer and buffalo, raided Pueblo villages, and learned to survive in a harsh land of canyons, deserts, and high mountain passes. But when horses arrived from Spanish settlements, everything changed, first slowly, then with breathtaking speed. The Comanche came down from the Shoshone in the north, discovering the horse not merely as a beast of burden, but as the very heart of life and war. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, they poured south onto the plains, transforming themselves into what many historians call the greatest light cavalry North America ever saw. They moved in bands, Nakoni, Yamparica, Quahati, Penatica, not a single empire, but united by language, ritual, and a shared code of raiding and revenge. To the Apache, these riders must have seemed unstoppable. The Apache knew how to fight in rocky passes, to vanish into ravines, to harass an enemy on foot. But on the wide-open plains, speed ruled, and speed belonged to the Comanche. Boys as young as 5 rode bareback, learning to guide horses with knees alone. Young warriors practiced the art of hanging off the far side of a galloping horse, making themselves a ghost target while loosing arrows from under the horse's neck. They could hit a running buffalo from full speed, and what they could do to a man was worse. The war between Comanche and Apache wasn't declared with speeches or signed on parchment. It was written in ash, blood, and horse tracks across the prairie. Raids came at night, when the moon cast shadows and the air smelled of dust and sweat. A Comanche raiding party might ride for days, crossing rivers and plains, to strike an Apache camp before dawn. They would burn lodges, seize horses, take captives, and vanish before the sun climbed high. For the Apache, every horse stolen was a crippling blow. Horses meant mobility, meant buffalo hunts, meant survival itself. The Apache fought back fiercely. They set traps in narrow canyons, ambushed Comanche parties returning home heavy with stolen stock. Sometimes they reclaimed captives, sometimes they took scalps. But they were fighting uphill. The Comanche were more numerous on the plains, had more horses, and had shaped their entire society around constant war and raiding. By the mid-1700s, Spanish missionaries and frontier soldiers began to record what they saw. Whole Apache bands pushed south into the deserts of New Mexico and Chihuahua, fleeing what they called Comanche terror. Settlers at El Paso and Santa Fe traded with the Apache, hearing tales of burned villages and children taken north, never to be seen again. The Spanish themselves felt the Comanche threat, their missions burned, ranches raided, captives taken. But from the Comanche view, this wasn't senseless slaughter. It was life. Raiding brought horses, wealth. Captives could be ransomed back, adopted, or married in. Taking a scalp showed courage, it meant you had faced danger and survived. Every generation of Comanche grew up hearing stories of ancestors' raids and victories over the Apache. A young warrior who returned from his first raid with a captured horse or scalp gained honor in the eyes of his band. The cycle of violence wasn't random, it was a system, passed from father to son. The Apache, too, measured valor in survival. They lived in smaller family groups, hidden in mountains and deserts, moving often to avoid surprise attacks. Their scouts watched the passes, their warriors learned to strike quickly and disappear like smoke. They held ceremonies to strengthen the hearts of young men before battle. Women sang, elders blessed weapons, and all prayed to spirits of wind, stone, and night. Yet decade by decade, the Comanche advance continued. Spanish records describe Apache lands once rich with horse herds reduced to poor camps with only a few animals left. Some Apache groups turned south, closer to Spanish settlements, hoping to trade and regroup. Others hardened in the desert, becoming masters of ambush but ceding the plains to the horse lords. The Comanche didn't rule like kings. There was no single chief commanding an army. Instead, dozens of bands followed respected leaders, men proven in war and generous in sharing spoils. Raiding parties formed by persuasion, not command. Success brought more followers, failure scattered them. But the combined effect of many bands raiding the same enemy over decades felt like an organized campaign of extermination. And so, the Apache withdrew. The open plains, once theirs to cross freely, became deadly ground. In Comancheria, the Comanche raised massive herds, traded with French and Spanish alike, and grew rich and feared. This endless war had costs, even for the victors. Young men died in distant raids, children grew up fatherless, captives sometimes escaped and carried stories of brutality. Disease rode the trade routes, smallpox and cholera took more Comanche lives than any Apache arrow. And always, somewhere on the horizon, a new enemy appeared, Texans, Mexican soldiers, and later the U.S. Army. Yet for generations, the Apache remained the Comanche's chief tribal rival. The memory of these raids lived on in songs, in scars, and in stories told around campfires under the endless sky. To outsiders, it was savagery. But to those who lived it, it was the price of freedom. The plains had no walls or kings. A man's worth lay in his skill, his courage, his horses, and the stories told of his deeds. As the 1800s dawned, new weapons and diseases reshaped the contest. Apache groups adapted, becoming elusive raiders in desert mountains. Comanche power peaked, their riders still the terror of the plains. But both would soon face the oncoming tide, repeating rifles, railroads, and settlers who saw empty land where nations had fought for centuries. By the 1850s and 1860s, the Comanche-Apache rivalry was overshadowed by wars with Texas Rangers, Mexican soldados, and the relentless push of American settlers. But its echoes remained. Old warriors spoke of dawn raids, burned camps, and the nights when the sky itself seemed to burn with Comanche torches. Today, traces of that war lie hidden, in Spanish diaries stained with rain, in stone arrowheads turned up by plows, and in place names that hint at battles long forgotten. The Apache still remember ancestors driven to the deserts, the Comanche remember ancestors who rode out at night and returned with horses and scars. Some see only savagery, but history rarely fits into neat boxes. These were people born into a world of risk and reward, where survival meant taking risks unthinkable today. Where life was measured not by years, but by deeds remembered and retold. Out there on the plains, if you stand quietly, you might feel it still, the wind bending the grass, the hush before dawn, the memory of hoofbeats that once shook the earth. Comanche fury. Apache courage. A war without mercy that shaped a continent's heart. If this story gave you something to think about, or reminded you that the past was real, bloody, and human, help us keep these memories alive. Like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe. Because some stories deserve to be told, no matter how dark, no matter how old.